Hey guys, today's video is going to be a story time video. I've actually been meaning to make this video for a while now, but for reasons that I've been lazy and I just don't know how to explain things correctly, I've been putting it off for way too long. So today I'm going to be talking about, pardon me, my abusive peer mentor, flatmate from when I studied abroad in London, fall of 2013. If you follow me on DeviantArt or my blog, you'll probably be familiar with this. So, since I have so much to say about this, I will post it as a two-parter. So here's part one, and I will post part two once I get that done. So without further ado, let's get started. In fall of 2013, when I studied abroad in London, even though I had a wonderful time over there, I had one of the worst roommate experiences ever, and I will explain as much as I can about that in this two-parter. And must I add, this is also kind of why I stopped my London vlogs, because all of the stress from the abuse I was receiving was starting to take its toll on me. Prior to this, I had had 3 bad homestay experiences in a row, which is a whole other story. And when I headed off to London, I was hoping that I would finally get relief, and this one would at least be an okay experience. I don't think I've mentioned this on my channel before, but I actually have Asperger's syndrome and anxiety problems, and to keep my stress levels down, and to have my space whenever I needed it, I had applied for a private room like always. And I figured this time my stay would be alright since I happened to be sharing a flat with our peer mentor. I wasn't asking for a stellar experience, but I did at least want a decent rooming situation. And seeing as how I had an amazing peer mentor my first year at college for my seminar class, I figured I'd have a decent stay at last. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to our peer mentor as Vicky, since she pretty much was Vicky from the Fairly Odd Parents. Okay, so when I first arrived, Vicky and I had an alright meeting. Everything was fine, but she did seem a little unenthusiastic and cold, and just had this constant scowl on her face, and I figured that she was just a little on the antisocial side, like I was, and she just liked to keep to herself. A day or so after that, I started to notice that something was up with her, but I shrugged it off and tried to convince myself that it's not going to be perfect, but it'll at least be decent. Okay, so this all started one day when we traveled to one of the marketplaces together with a few friends, and due to me having motion sickness problems, I got a little sick on the tube ride on the way over there, and I had to step aside to rest for a bit while the others continued on just to let my stomach settle and everything, and Vicky stepped off with me to stay by my side. Now, being the peer mentor of the group, it of course was her job to make sure I was alright. But I figured I would be alright if I just went back to the flats, and I wanted to go back on my own. So I told her, you know what, just go back to the group, I'll be alright, I'm just one person, I can navigate a city on my own, I'll just head back to the flats. The other students need you more than I do, don't worry about me. And she just told me, I'm not leaving without you. Okay, understandable. You're supposed to be there if someone's invalid, but what if they were telling you that they would be fine without you? Now, I am a bit of an emetophobic, and I was terrified of getting sick, so I was just sitting there at the station. But the whole time, I was feeling bad about keeping her with me and holding her down, even though she was pretty much holding herself down by choosing to stay with me. But eventually, we continued on, but rather slowly, and the whole time, she was, in a way, kind of indirectly scolding me for holding her back, claiming that I wasn't able to handle things properly. Basically, the whole time, she was hovering over me, and she was guilt-tripping me from keeping her from the group, and no matter what I did or said, she continued to say, I'm not leaving without you. Not exactly the best bedside demeanor, if you ask me. And if anything, she was only making things worse by hovering over me rather than giving me my space. When we got back, she gave me a long talk about how I was that day, and despite my constant neurotic apologies, she told me that they might need to remove me from the program if I can't handle things properly, even though it was all her choice to hover over me like that, in spite of what I asked her. On top of that, Vicky was always bragging and telling me how she was the director of the program and how she was in charge, when really she wasn't the boss of everything on the program director was. And Vicky was not the director, she was just the assistant and was just there to support us and help us out. And also, she was a nasty nitpicker of mistakes. I remember every time I made a mistake, she would throw the book at me, no matter how little it was, or no matter how much control I had over it. Every time I made a mistake, she would lock it in her head and use it against me in the future, no matter how small it was. I remember this one time, I made a mistake and she screamed at me for it. Now, being that I had Asperger's, I tried to explain to her that I didn't like being screamed at like that, but instead, she just screamed to me, "I understand that!" in that very tone. Wow. No, she did not. Why do I get the feeling that she was just saying that to justify her nasty tone? Still, I held the truth in and decided that maybe it was all me, and that's when I pretty much decided that I had to be perfect or I wouldn't make it in the semester. But for some reason, every time I made a mistake, she seemed to never want to put it behind her. And aside from that, she was always telling me to ask her for help whenever I needed it. But every time I asked Vicky for directions or for help on something, she would reply with either, "You're a junior, you'll figure it out," or interrupting with things like, "Did you go to the field trip with us yesterday? It's the same exact stop." Or she would go, "I'm not your mother, I can't do your work for you," before I could get my question finished. And it's like she was hired to help us but didn't want to do her job. And then came this time. We had taken a field trip, and I was waiting outside the place for someone to call me or text me saying it was time to go. I waited for about 20 minutes or so, no answer, and then I pull out my phone, and lo and behold, my phone had no service for some reason. I rebooted it, and I get bombarded with all of these texts from Vicky. And finally, I call her and tell her, "Look, I'm sorry I didn't come, my phone wasn't working, but don't worry, I'm on my way." But did she show any hint of understanding when I was finally able to get a hold of her? No. Instead, she yelled at me, saying, "Hurry up, the train's about to leave," acting like it was my fault that I didn't get her messages and I was just being lazy. The whole time, she was just basically like, "Well, hurry up, the train's about to leave," and not saying, "Don't worry, don't panic," and, and I told her I was on my way, but she continued to rush me and tell me to hurry up with a nasty tone in her voice, and I had no choice but to pretty much hang up on her. Also, what if I didn't know how to get to the station? Would she do the right thing and explain what to do if I didn't make it? No, considering who she was, she probably would have told me to handle things on my own, even though it was her job to help us out when things like these happen. I remember when I studied abroad in Paris, even though our director was a little on the strict side, she was really great at running the program. And I remember one time I had gotten off at the wrong stop, and all she had to do was say, "Okay, don't panic, here's what you have to do," and pretty much gave me all the instructions on what I had to do, and I got there successfully. So anyways, back to my story. When we got back to London after our field trip, I rushed ahead of the group and got back to the flat about 10 minutes before Vicky did, just to avoid her. And when she finally came back, the first thing she did was yell at me, "We need to talk!" I tried to tell her that now wasn't the best time and we could discuss this in the morning since it was nighttime and I want some time to myself after how she treated me. But she wanted none of that. She wanted instant gratification and to talk to me right there, right now, no questions asked. So finally, to get her off my back, I said, "Okay, fine. I'm sorry my phone wasn't working. I'm sorry I almost missed the train. I'm sorry I inconvenienced you." There we talked. I said that because I pretty much figured she was going to keep on yelling at me like that over my mistake. But that wasn't the case. She wanted to talk to me over, "I don't like how you're always anticipating me yelling at you." She wanted to talk to me over how I shouldn't be scared of her yelling at me, even though she was pretty much yelling at me right then and there. Wow, I repeat phrases a lot. That night, we did have a talk and everything was alright, but here's the problem. Every time we talked things out, it was basically me apologizing for pretty much nothing and admitting that I was wrong and I needed to be better. But the next day, or a few days later, we would always go right back to square one. Other things happened in between. Like one time I gave her something that she had lost and she yanked it out of my head and screamed in my face. And she didn't even say thank you. And then another time I asked her to show me how to do something, and when she showed me, she practically yelled it at me. And another time I tried asking her how to refill the minutes on my phone, but she kept on interrupting me, saying follow the instructions on the card. And I told her that I tried doing that, but I was confused with some of the instructions and I just needed clarification on what to do and what not to do on doing that. But she kept on repeating follow the instructions on the card over and over again. So I told her, you know what, let's just walk away from this, walk away. But she continued to yell at me just because I wasn't doing what she said and told me that it wasn't a difficult concept. And she started to tell me I was overreacting and making a mountain out of a molehill, even though she wasn't letting me explain to her what I was having trouble with, and she was just escalating the tension. Also, every time she tried to apologize for yelling at me, it would always be along the lines of, look, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but it was early in the morning, I didn't have my coffee yet, you were bothering me, and the question is, why didn't she just say, not right now, give me a minute, when she could have? So, that's it for part 1. I will post part 2 pretty soon. It gets a lot worse, trust me. Okay, so until then, this is Hyper Galaxy, signing out.